You've heard the term put your best face forwards, right? It's an expression meaning to make yourself appear as charming and professional as possible when meeting new people or delivering that big pitch to the board of investors. You know which pitch I'm talking about, you got this. Well, it seems a number of video game characters have also heard this idiom, only they decided that they didn't make the right impression the first go around and chose to take the phrase all too literally. Yes, doing their very best face-off impression, the following characters came racing back into the spotlight of their respective remakes or remasters wearing somebody else's face. This isn't a full redesign or a revamp of their personalities or quirks, rather the digital equivalent of reconstructive plastic surgery. Who knows, maybe they owed money to the mob and needed to disappear, only with the same name, job, and, well, everything else. I don't know. Regardless, be it to match their actors' looks, more accurately represent their in-game age, or just for fun, these new faces are sure to get a second glance. I'm the face-swapped Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 remade video game characters who looked completely different. Number 10. Ramon Salazar, Resident Evil 4. Capcom have been on a roll with their Resident Evil remakes. 2 and 3 were both fantastic reimaginings that revamped the scares for modern audiences. When it came to Resident Evil 4, however, fans were skeptical. How can you improve upon one of the greatest games of all time? Well, somehow Capcom did the impossible, because the remake is just as masterful as the original. Naturally though, changes had to be made. Graphics are a biggie, taking an admittedly still pretty good-looking 18-year-old game and giving it a fresh 4K coat of paint. And with the updated graphics came updated character models. Now admittedly, most of them look different to their 2005 counterparts. Ashley appears more grown-up and capable, Luis looks a little less suave but a lot more realistic, but it's Ramon Salazar who received the biggest facelift, or whatever the opposite of a facelift is. A face drop? In the original game, he resembles a man who never really lost the petulant boy looks that we assume he's had since he was a child, whereas in the remake, he doesn't look like he was ever a young boy at all. Both looks suit their games remarkably well, with the slightly younger version, albeit still a pasty ill-looking one, fitting nicely with the original's campy vibes, and the older Ramon gelling nicely with the darker atmosphere of the remake. Either way though, they both turn into a big fleshy blob monster in the end. Number 9. Alan Wake, Alan Wake. You'd think acclaimed crime author Alan Wake would be used to the attention of paparazzi and adoring fans, but based on the new face he dons in the 2021 remaster of the original game, perhaps it all became too much and he had to get away. Originally released in 2010, Alan Wake follows the titular author as he searches for his wife in the Twin Peaks-esque Bright Falls, all the while fighting off shadowy manifestations of the townsfolk as a manuscript he can't remember writing comes to life. It's very much Stephen King meets David Lynch in the best possible way. When working on its sequel, developers Remade Entertainment wanted to really push the boat out in terms of storytelling, and this involved plenty of live-action cutscenes. This meant Alan needed to look a heck of a lot more like the man he was modeled after, one Ilka Villi. The remaster was the perfect jumping-off point to get fans used to Alan's new look, and with the updated visuals and 4K graphics, he really does look a lot more like a real person and less like a generic 2010s action hero. More games should use the live-action approach going forward, we think, especially if we get to see more scenes like this. Number 8. Wanda, Shadow of the Colossus. Ah, Shadow of the Colossus. Somber, deeply reflective, and one of the best Are We the Baddies games ever made. In a story told mainly through actions over dialogue, all accompanied by emotionally gut-wrenching music, players slip into the sandals of Wanda as he embarks on a quest to slay 16 ancient colossi in the hopes it will bring a young woman named Mono back to life. Of course, it doesn't take the player long to realize that killing 16 16 majestic beasts at the behest of a mysterious disembodied voice might not be the best idea. The beloved PS2 classic was first remastered in 2011 with shinier graphics but no major visual redesigns, but was then treated to the full remake experience in 2018. This was a complete from-the-ground-up redo, updating the gameplay, controls, and of course, graphics. The colossi themselves look almost identical, only with stonier stone and furrier fur, but Wanda looks very different. While his age is never specified, he looks to be in his late teens in the original, with a more stoic, angular face, whereas the remake version of Wanda looks significantly younger. Playing as this rounder-faced, more expressive youth really changes the feel of the game, like you're controlling a boy out of his depth rather than a headstrong young man determined he's doing the right thing. It's down to personal preference whether this tonal change is an improvement or not. Number 7. Sheila, Spyro 3: Year of the Dragon. And now for something completely different. Not a human character at all, but an anthropomorphized kangaroo. The original Spyro trilogy was a platforming staple of the PS1, where developers Insomniac cut their teeth on the gameplay they would later refine in the likes of Ratchet & Clank, and many young fans developed a lifelong love of video games here. Naturally then, such a trilogy was dying to be remade, and in 2018, it was. Of course, this being a remake of PS1 games, the difference in graphical fidelity is nothing short of outstanding. Grass with individual blades, flags fluttering in the wind, light bouncing realistically, and gone are the days of those blocky character models. I mean, I'll miss them, they had their charm, but never mind. While every character received a graphical facelift to take them from blocky to beautiful, it was Sheila who changed the most. The original Sheila was, well, she was just a kangaroo, plain and simple. With a rather uninspired character model, she resembled every generic cartoon kangaroo you ever saw on TV as a kid. In the remake, however, she sports a fresh new hairdo and a fashionable khaki safari jacket. It's a simple update, but one that really shows off her adventurousness yet easygoing nature, and makes her a lot more memorable to boot. There was one other change though, which is that her waist is now narrow enough to pass through the eye of a flipping needle. I don't know whose decision this was, but they should be ashamed of themselves. Those are some unrealistic beauty standards for kangaroos the world over. Number 6. James Bond, GoldenEye 007. Often, a remake will redesign, at most, a character's face and/or head and stop short of overhauling their entire model design. The remake of GoldenEye 007, however, did exactly that, replacing the original game's James Bond with a completely different person. Luckily for Bond, though, he's used to such things, constantly changing faces and bodies every few years like a trigger-happy Doctor Who. The original GoldenEye came out in 1997, and it immediately revolutionized both the first-person shooter genre and split-screen multiplayer, going down in history as a genuine classic. However, modern audiences looking to get a piece of the fun might struggle to get on with its antiquated controls, so a remake was set in motion and released in 2010. This total rehaul didn't just update the controls though, it updated Bond himself, turning him from a blocky Pierce Brosnan to a bargain bin Daniel Craig. But that's bargain bin in looks only, because old Craigie actually stepped in to do the voice work. While not as revolutionary as the original, this new version did reimagine the story to better suit the grittier aesthetic of the modern films. It's just a shame it wasn't remade a little more recently. If it had been, our eyes might have been treated to a lovely, more photorealistic Daniel Craig, rather than the potato-faced protagonist we ended up with here. Number 5. Emily Hartwood, Alone in the Dark. Having set the template for all future games dealing with the sinister and supernatural, Alone in the Dark is essentially the granddaddy for the likes of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. You may have noticed though that it looks rather blocky and, well, not even remotely scary these days. With its surprisingly colourful pre-rendered backgrounds and unfathomable beasties that look like a 6-year-old drew them, the original title is more likely to elicit laughter than screams. It's no surprise then that it received a remake. This version completely reworked the character models, from the eldritch horrors to the two protagonists. Both Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby have had the Hollywood makeover, but today we'll focus on Emily. In the original, she looked rather generic, in a green suit and pencil skirt, someone more at home in an office block than a haunted mansion, whereas in the remake, she's none other than Killing Eve star Jodie Comer. Jodie Comer's performance and likeness give this Emily far more of a personality, and make her feel a lot more human and relatable. This is a character who looks, sounds, and acts like she knows what she's doing when it comes to investigating mysterious deaths and hunting nightmares. Not that that's relevant, it all comes down to whether the player knows what they're doing. Otherwise, it's curtains for Jodie. Number 4. Ryo Takashima, Yakuza 2. The Yakuza series, or Like a Dragon if you want to get recent rebranding about this, consists of a whopping 23 entries if you include all the spin-offs and remakes, all of which sport brilliantly bizarre storylines, mad minigames, and an eclectic cast of off-the-wall characters. However, as the series has spanned almost 2 decades and took a little while to gain traction outside of Japan, many newer fans were unable to enjoy the earliest titles in their original form. This led to the Kiwami remakes of the first 2 games. As ever, these remakes served as an opportunity to update the faces of the aforementioned eclectic cast. Most received a gentle facelift, a slight aging up or down, a fuller goatee, or brighter sparkle in the eyes. But for one reason or another, antagonist and chief of HQ of the evil Omi Alliance, Ryo Takashima, looks like he was melted in the microwave. Original Ryo was a rather dashing young man with high cheekbones, stylish glasses, and a floppy haircut to rival Leon S. Kennedy's, whereas remake Ryo has aged, and not gracefully. His haircut is more sensible, his glasses less stylish, and his skin has sagged into bulldog-like jowls. Seeing as he's canonically 40 years old, it seems the designers might have missed the mark by 20 years or so. Number 3. Isaac Clarke, Dead Space. Taking a leaf out of Capcom's book, Motive Studios remade the very best space-based survival horror from the ground up, and while the gameplay hasn't changed much, the graphics have improved exponentially. Now every corridor is a dimly lit nightmare, every enemy an uncanny horror, and the dismemberment is so realistic it might make you sick. Of course, they performed a little digital surgery on the characters too. While it was a horror game, the original Dead Space's character models were just a little too dead-eyed, which added to the atmosphere but prevented players from getting properly attached. And whilst they all had a touch-up, protagonist Isaac Clarke's might be the starkest change of the lot. In the original, players only got to see Isaac's face at the very start and very end of the game. This version was gruff and greying with bags beneath his eyes and a haunted look even before the horror began. Remake Isaac, though, was remodeled after his actor Gunnar Wright and looks a heck of a lot less traumatized and more like a real-life engineer in a spacesuit as a result. He's a lot more expressive this time around too, but if you do miss that traumatized 1,000-yard stare sort of look, you can always just let him get a little too close to a few necromorphs. I'm sure he'll look just as haunted as you remember before long. Number 2. Tess, The Last of Us. Debates about when it's the right time to remake a game aside, The Last of Us Part 1 is truly impressive. While the gameplay and mechanics haven't changed, the graphics have been turned up so far past 11 that the dial broke off. Everything from the lighting to the foliage on the trees to, of course, the character models has been painstakingly reworked to the point that if you didn't know you were playing a game, you could almost mistake them for real life. And while most of the character models were merely tweaked to better correspond with their Part 2 counterparts, Tess looks like a completely different person. In the 2013 original, Tess looks surprisingly young to be a grizzled survivor from before the outbreak. With her sharp features, especially those cheekbones, she looks more like a supermodel than a smuggler. In the remake though, she looks much closer to Joel in age and experience, as if she really is the tough smuggler the other lowlifes of the quarantine zone fear and respect. She also looks a lot more like her actor, Annie Wershing, and, well, a lot more like a real person just trying to get by. Still doesn't really explain how she can lift Joel up with one hand, though. She's really hiding those muscles away somewhere, isn't she? And number 1, Peter Parker, Marvel's Spider-Man. Sometimes you risk it all with a brand new look that you think really suits you and hope everyone will welcome with open arms, only for them all to hate it. Well, maybe hate is a strong word, but there were plenty of strong words being thrown around when Insomniac remastered Spider-Man for the PS5 and introduced the world to Peter Parker's new face. The original Pete certainly looked a little quirky, but that suited his personality just fine, and the faint wrinkles around his mouth and forehead made him seem a little older and more experienced, which made sense seeing as this version of Spider-Man had 8 years of villain squashing under his belt before the events of the game. Made sense, that is, until you find out he was bitten by that fateful spider at 15, meaning he's supposed to be 23 years old here. Suddenly we can see why they went with the remastered more youthful, carefree face. Yes, he might look like a knockoff Tom Holland, but the change was made to better match actor Yuri Lowenthal's performance capture and allows for a more emotionally expressive Peter. It didn't take that long to get used to the new look though, we don't think. Certainly by the end of Spider-Man 2, it had become the new normal. Now just wait for the PS6 remaster of Spider-Man 2 when they inevitably make him look even younger. 13-year-old Peter Parker, here we come.